surprise, surprise, the Republicans that were in power continued to be in power. They won their elections, and by big numbers. Stacey Abrams didn't even come close like she did in 2018. Raffensperger won too. Raffensperger runs the elections in that state. But they didn't do shit for Trump in 2020. So that just tells you that, yes, in fact, there's something fishy going on. There's something that was going on in that election, and probably the same shit that was going on in these other elections. And but the other states didn't do anything. People say, well, why didn't why didn't Dr. Oz win in Pennsylvania? Well, he didn't win in Pennsylvania for different reasons, but one of the reasons why he lost so badly, I think he lost by 4 percentage points or something. It makes sense if you think about it. It makes sense why he lost by so much. I mean, he wasn't that bad, but still. Two Fetterman who people say well, he's retarded, he's this, he's that. It makes sense because the reason why it makes sense, simply put, is because the reason why it makes sense is because one, the guy was a union guy. Two, he's part of the Pennsylvania politics. And I'm not sure about this, but I believe he might have been Attorney General, Lieutenant General, which is like the Vice President of Pennsylvania during 2020. He might have actually been part of all the fraud, and he might have been one of the people who made the mail-in ballot fraud harvesting possible in 2020. And then he got, so if you're Democrats, if you're the establishment in general, then Fetterman, if that's what I'm saying is true, he had to win for 2024, right? So there's that, but also, like I said, he's part of the Pennsylvania establishment. He's one of their guys, and he's a union guy. Dr. Oz is not from Pennsylvania. I don't think he's a union guy. So people are voting for what they knew, right? There's that. Two, again, there's mail-in ballot harvesting, right? There's the cities. There's all these things. There's a uniqueness to demographics of how they do this, when they commit this type of fraud. I'm going to call it fraud, but even though it's like it was legalized by 2020, it was legalized in 2020. So what's my point? My point in all this is that when it comes to Pennsylvania, it makes sense. It makes sense. So my point with this is that in Pennsylvania, I believe that Fetterman was going to win anyways, whether it was through fraud or not. But the number, it would have been a lot closer if it wasn't for the fraud. Now, how do I know this? Well, look at how Mastriano did against Shapiro. Now, I think Shapiro probably would have won anyways, but it's so off when it comes to the governor's race in Pennsylvania. It's ridiculous. And Mastriano was one of the people who brought the fraud, who was fighting the system in 2020. He's one of the ones that was trying to expose the fraud, I believe, right, in 2020. Now, I don't know his whole story, but yeah. Now, why is it that this Shapiro guy did so well? Like, he blew out Mastriano. Again, Shapiro had to win because the governor is the one that oversees. The governor and the Secretary of State are the ones who oversee the elections, as far as I understand. So Shapiro, had to win, right? But Mastriano, I think, was a very divisive figure and everything else. But what I'm saying is that the numbers are so ridiculous for a state that is somewhat slimly a Trump state, right? Or was in 2016. Why has everything changed? Well, it's because of the voting laws. It doesn't make sense if you think about it, that these states would just go all of a sudden flip for Trump. I mean, against Trump. People say, it's the unions. Yeah, partly it's the unions. But this strong? But they would flip this strong? And not only that, but Trump hasn't been in power for 2 years, so it doesn't make any sense. Because these states were basically, what happened, this is what I think happened. And what happened was that in 2016, It's not that the Democrats didn't do fraud. It's not that the Republicans don't do fraud in places and everything else. No, it's that the establishment wanted Hillary Clinton to win. This is my theory. But they thought that because Trump was such a bad candidate, in fact, the Democrats wanted Trump to win the primaries for the Republicans, that they believed that it was going to be easy for him to win. I'm sorry, it was going to be easy for her to win. It was going to be easy for Hillary Clinton to win. So they brought down their guard, right? They're just like, well, whatever happens, happens. Well, when the election happened, Trump barely went through, right? He won through the electoral college. He won in Pennsylvania. He won in Michigan. He won in these states, these blue collar states, right? I guess that's what they call him, because he's that type of guy. That's what Trump was selling himself to. He was pandering to those people, right? People were surprised and everything else, and he won. Surprising Democrats. This is the worst nightmare the Democrats had, but even more, it's not really about Democrats. It's about the establishment, what the establishment wanted. The establishment wanted Hillary Clinton to win. So what did they do? The Republicans didn't want Trump, and the Democrats didn't want Trump. I'm talking about the establishment. So they made his time in office living hell, right? The media was against him. And the media is controlled by the establishment, and and the Republicans, who were supposed to be there to help Trump, made things difficult for him as well. Everybody made things difficult. The Republican Congress made it difficult for him. Everybody made it difficult for him to get anything done, because that's not their agenda. That's not the establishment's agenda, right? So they, in cahoots, they used the pandemic and all that, which, to be honest, the virus COVID was engineered in a lab. It should be obvious to people now, and the vaccines, and the lab that was that engineered it was engineering it to make vaccines. So this is all connected, right? And then you have the vaccines that are brought up through Operation Warp Speed in Trump's administration. But again, this was all engineered by people in government, by the establishment. And then they used all this, the pandemic, to basically bring about these mail-in voting laws that were very specific, not just any old mail-in voting laws, but ones that would allow ballot harvesting in key states. So the states, this is what's interesting, the states that were key to Trump winning in 2016 were basically corrupted so that Trump couldn't win in 2020. And so people screamed out loud that there was election fraud and all this stuff, and these are people that were supporting Trump and blah, 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 and all this other stuff. And obviously, the establishment, through the media and through all that, were able to deny them any changes in any of these states that had voting fraud. And the Republican establishment, even both the Democrat and Republican establishments in those states, made it very difficult for people to do anything. And because they were working with cahoot with the media, which is controlled by the establishment, they can make it seem like there was no voting fraud, or they can brainwash everybody to think that, well, no, look, every time they try to go through the courts, again, courts are part of the establishment, they get denied because there is no election fraud, right? So what this did is, people were seeing in social media and everything else how they were denied even a little bit of space to say their opinion, right? Their skepticism of the system, and this is very problematic for them, right? So this created the whole Stop the Steal movement, and then Stop the Steal, of course, ended up with the January 6th thing, the Capitol thing, which again was, if you look at it, was ridiculous, because Democrats, protesters, and activists had entered that Capitol, and for years, historically, many times, Black Panthers, I think even the Weather Underground, and then even during Trump's administration, there was Democrats, activists, liberal activists who entered and were protesting inside the Congress and the Capitol, whatever. And then nothing happened to them. They weren't called insurrectionists. Nothing. They didn't go to jail. They weren't called terrorists or traitors or anything. But when Republicans do that, when Trump supporters do that, they are. And the whole thing was blown out of proportion to make it look like they were insurrectionists, based on a few people, few like Q retards who were probably brainwashed by who knows who, probably also created by the establishment, Operation Trust. I think that's what the Soviets called it, right? That's what I think Q is. It's a version of that. But they had all these people go and try to, who were basically led into the Capitol. And then you had some of these militia people who did it too, who were talking about removing, taking action and everything else. And these people, surprise, surprise, there's feds that are part of these organizations. There was the whole Whitmer thing that happened that came out that showed that, feds were actually the ones instigating the militias to do these things. But anyways, these few people that were part of the protest were the ones, liberals and the establishment say that those few people, were in control of all the people, the 100,000 people that were even at the Capitol, and the few people that actually went in, the few hundred that actually went inside the Capitol. They were all part of the militia. They were all part of this terrorist group, right? Which is not true. People went to stop this deal on January 6th for the reasons I'm telling you right now, because they were skeptical of the election. They saw the irregularities and everything else. So what the establishment did is they created like a basically like it was like the Reichstag, fire, right? So they created this fake narrative around that, and made it seem like, well, Trump people are dangerous and they're insurgents, and that any talk of the election is against democracy and is wrong. And anybody who does that should be in jail. In fact, they threw hundreds of people in jail. These are political prisoners, right? So what's my point? My point is, this is all based on voter fraud, right? And then that because of what happened after the 2020 election, voter fraud was never dealt with. The voter fraud that people were bringing up, all that stuff was never dealt with. Now, there's also another angle to this, was that a lot of distractions were created, a lot of divisions were created in this movement, right? What do I mean? Well, instead of talking about the real thing, which was the laws that were changed, that made ballot harvesting a thing, they talked about Dominion. They talked about fake ballots. You have all these publications that are right wingers that, to me, are really just grifters, right? They were feeding off people's anger, right? All these groups were distracting people, getting them off of the real problem, which was ballot harvesting, right? Which is the voter ID laws, which is the way. Not only that, it's even more than that. It's the way that these ballots are actually checked and everything else. The signatures, all this stuff. None of this stuff was fixed. Instead, you had people like Sidney Powell and Giuliani, who are establishment people, making a fool of the whole movement. And nobody ever actually dealt with the real problems. And this is why, at the end of the day, you have Kerry Lake losing, in my opinion, in this 2022 midterms.